I want to thank the panelists for being here today. We're going to try to take a little different flair where I'm going to introduce the panelists, and I'm literally going to give them 1 minute, and I'm going to be really, really, really stringent on that minute to get them to just give a little foray into kind of what we're going to be discussing or what they're respectively going to be sharing as their expertise, the issue expertise, and then I'm going to ask a few questions, and I really don't want this panel to be a panel as we've been getting feedback from folks that they'd like to see more audience engagement. So we're gonna make sure to have that kind of audience opportunity. There are already a few folks who I know I'm gonna point to ask questions, but that's gonna be the format of this panel. This panel today is one of which I'm super delighted to have a dynamic, there are no children, kick-ass group of panelists, as all the panelists have been, to really showcase the need for our kind of comprehensive thinking about smart cities and the questions that they bring around urbanization and the societies of the future. To my immediate left, we have Dr. Lee McKnight. If you could please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. We're friends and colleagues and related at Syracuse University, and we're also co-directors of the, get this, Global City Team Challenge, Smart City and Community, SC, so GCTC, SC3. Now, are you ready? We haven't even started the acronym yet. I'm serious. Cloud Privacy, Security, and Rights Inclusive Architecture, which is pronounced SRIA. Okay, and we'll explain what that is later.
Absolutely. Jalal Awan.
Thank you, Yusuf. My acronym is a bit simpler. I'm coming from RAND, which is Research and Development. So I'm a PhD candidate in my 3rd year, and I'm an assistant policy researcher at RAND. My overall areas are energy and climate policy, and my background is electrical engineering. So yeah, I kind of switched to policy a little later than I should have, I guess.
It's never too late to switch to policy. We have with us here, as this event is a part of New York City Climate Week, we have the Vice President of New York City Economic Development Corporation, Karen Bhatia.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Karen Bhatia, as Yusuf mentioned, I'm Senior Vice President at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're considered the city's economic engine. So what we specifically do is try to figure out what are areas of industry and technology that we want to see grow here in New York, and what can we do to help facilitate that and to ensure that all New Yorkers across all the different 5 boroughs, across all the different racial, ethnic, religious, all the diverse New Yorkers that we have here have access to these types of opportunities. I lead our creative and applied tech team, so I support industries and emerging technologies as well as in the creative sectors. So that includes fashion, media, food, etc.
Thank you, Karen. And last but certainly not least, Matthew James Bailey, an IoT expert who has advised Fortune 500 companies and published really 2 important issues, both book and articles on this topic. The article being Building Smart Cities Mindfully, and the book being Mindfully Building an Artificial Intelligence-Enabled Society. Matthew.
Do you want me to introduce myself?
Please.
Okay, fine. Matthew James Bailey, the guy with the accent. One of the internationally recognized pioneers of the Internet of Things, an award nominee alongside people like Elon Musk, who you may know as Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the World Wide Web. I do work with governments, both federal and national, on their economic strategy and innovation strategy, particularly in Alberta, Canada, which is really, really moving into smart ag, AI, and other things. The white paper that I wrote, Building Smart Cities Mindfully, has been downloaded by 500 cities in 62 countries around the world, and those are principles of how to bring communities together and innovate their future. It's a new economic development paradigm, and that has been proven in Colorado with the US's first and only statewide alliance of 20 cities, different tiers, Fortune 500 and startups, academia, federal labs, and others to co-create their future together. And also raised money and wrote the thesis for a Smart City Innovation Center, which is the pathway to execution. And I'm also in the middle of writing the book, How to Build Smart Cities Mindfully. And in the keynote I'm giving at the end of the day, I'm going to be breaking some new thought leadership around AI in the city as well. Thanks for being here.
This is going to be an amazing panel. One thing I wanted to make sure to ask everyone, and I've kind of, moderators should moderate and they shouldn't necessarily be creating agendas, but we kind of created an agenda, and the agenda is really to make sure we have this conversation from a lens of intergenerational equity, and we want to make sure that that is a central component about how we think about and talk about these issues. But smart cities is such a buzzword, right? There's not a necessary kind of centralized understanding of what smart cities are, and the types of ways with which we consider the applications of smart cities and the benefits that they can have as a mechanism to promote the SDGs is not necessarily as clearly defined, or it can be defined in multiple ways. So I'm actually going to begin with you, Matthew. If you can give us a kind of operational understanding of what smart cities are.
Well, first of all, smart cities is a transitional piece from the old paradigm into the new paradigm. And that transitional piece is this. It's about understanding through technology the activities and what's going on in the physical world and in our governmental services, etc., looking at challenges like affordable housing, water security, public safety, mobility and transportation, other things. Smart cities, there is no definition for it. It is your vision of how technology will enable your community to invent its future. So it's a transitional piece into new paradigms of the future, which is all about rediscovering the threads of community.
Thank you. I think that's a really good operational definition that we're going to use for this discussion today, and the way in which we're going to frame our conversation. When we think about smart cities and we think about this fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, our data is everywhere. It's in your watches, it's in your phones, and that data, it can be securitized or not securitized, and it can be hacked by players who are in the cybercrime world, or it can be, in the case of, as you say, water metering can be hacked into by players who may have domestic terrorism concerns or international terrorism concerns. I want to go to first Jalal to talk a little bit about how do we create the types of security and cybersecurity mechanisms to make sure that our data is protected. And then Lee, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the two projects that you have ongoing, one being in the city of Syracuse and how it as a city was left behind and is trying to promote itself in the new fourth industrial revolution as a leader. But then what are the types of things that the GCTC are doing to connect and be focusing on the privacy and security aspects of that? And then talk about Liberia. Jalal, please.
Thanks for putting me on the spot, Yusuf.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I've done a little bit of research on cybersecurity aspects, particularly related to unmanned aerial vehicles. But there's application in the hardware and software side of cybersecurity for a smart city. And a fundamental component is the infrastructure and communications technology, the infrastructure that you have to enable all of the smart mobility or smart governance or all sorts of smart options. The more IoT devices we have as a base case, the more vulnerabilities we are basically exposing ourselves to, right? There are hardware loopholes which could be misused by state or non-state actors, and in order to gain to gain access to, let's say, the distribution side of the electric grid, like the more proliferated these devices become, the more you're exposing the whole city and the community to vulnerabilities in both hardware and software. So I'd say, yeah, cybersecurity and privacy are some of the key concerns when you look at that. And then there are solutions like blockchain to overcome privacy issues, de-identify information that's personal and stuff like that.
Lee, the issues around privacy and technology are things that we have had discussions about, and inclusion. And then Karen, I'm gonna jump to you for the inclusion pieces afterwards. But can you talk a little bit about the two projects in Syracuse? Because I think they, both in Syracuse and Liberia, because they do two things. They help talk about a developed country and a community that's been left behind and how that community is trying to propel itself into the future by becoming a new tech hub. But then Liberia going from being a post-conflict country, dealing with the challenges of Ebola, and now trying to become a smart city, using smart city technologies as a means to build internet from 7% to 40% in a short amount of time. And so can you talk about both of those as case studies for what the opportunities can be?
Sure, and again, it's great to be here with all of you, and I appreciate the opportunity to share. So, so we just heard about all of those vulnerabilities of all of those things. I was the guy freaking out enough about this to go to the White House twice back in 2015, saying things are gonna get worse. We got to do something. And so I'm the man with the plan. And I do have a plan, which we have taken forward first into that SRIA is what is sort of operationalized. So the city of Syracuse has one of the deepest pockets of urban poverty just a mile from campus. So it's an ongoing crime against humanity right next to campus. So there's things that need to be fixed in the city that that the current mayor is committed to, Ben Walsh. And from the federal level, but we'll just cut to the chase on saying, okay, develop a plan for the region, work with the city, and use cloud technology, but not just cloud, also edge, Internet of Things. Oh, that's not enough. You also need AI and machine learning. Oh, that's not enough. There's blockchain as well. So what we've done is form a public-private partnership where I'm the one with the connections to some of these people, but I say, no, I want ACLU in the room when I'm talking to the companies, when I'm talking to the city, rather than coming to the city afterwards saying, what did you just do? What did you just buy? It's better to have rights included from the beginning. So there's human rights built into this, but that's not enough either. There's also property and data rights coming from the blockchain technology. So we have developed a smart city and community, cloud, privacy, security, and rights inclusive architecture, which sounds really complicated, but you boil it down to 3 colors: red, yellow, green. That's all you need to know. What does red mean? Stop. What does it mean? Stop. Think. It's sensitive data, better protected, PKI information.
So a little louder.
You'll back up your data to the cloud and you won't be held for ransom. Hello. So yellow data, classified some level of concern. Okay, so you better be clear about how you're handling it. Green data, open civic data. Go ahead and steal it, please. We want that out and available. So thinking this through for the community, at one level, you just stop ransomware attacks because you start thinking about architecture. Second, using the word cloud. In the real world, clouds don't care if you're a city or a company or a school system or a library or a citizen. So we're thinking through regional economic development style approaches to security where people can have conversations across sectors. And of course, they're going to have their own different mechanisms, but they're able to work together now. So for the city, they're already spending tens of millions of dollars on smart streetlight networks. Well, with this framework, while they're implementing that, they will be thinking about privacy. They will be building this with security. So by design, privacy by design, security by design, and rights included by design, both human rights and property or other kind of blockchain data rights. So we have this at the level of a draft, which I was just down presenting at the federal level last week in Washington, again, released it in the summer. It's almost scary how quickly this is pushing forward because we haven't done enough research on it to really ensure it's valid. We welcome more participation. So that's, in a nutshell, we're developing this. And of course, wouldn't it be good to try this? Because this is designed to be scalable. So it's the same architecture, whether you're a local little library, you're a school system, or you're the city of New York. You can all implement this, is the way this is intended to be. Or the whole state of New York. Or, we could work with Colorado too, right, Matthew? Down the way. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from and where we're still evolving this. Now we take that architecture that works for, so far, in dialogue, a public-private partnership with about 20 organizations. We have another meeting that'll be hopefully live streamed as well coming up in November. You're all welcome to come into Syracuse or catch it online. Now switch to Liberia.
We'll actually hold Liberia because I want to make sure to get Karen to come in here because Karen, you have a breadth of work. As you say, Economic Development Corporation is the economic engine of New York City. And you've been doing this for 13 years?
In New York City?
Yes.
2.5 years.
Excuse me, your work in kind of leveraging strategy and these sorts of things is a 13 plus year career where you've been able to think about how to implement these things and actually get them done in ways that are building the types of collaborations. And what I think, and particularly because there was a person in the audience who approached me and said, this is a great discussion, I'd love to hear about the creative side, and I'd love to hear about what this can be for people in the fashion industry. And I don't want that to be the bulk of what you say, but if you could comment on what this means for a city scale and the way in which your strategy and work has been in New York City, but also what are the things that we're not thinking about, like the fashion application? What is, since every iteration of the Industrial Revolution, there's been concern that machines will replace people, and that's been a constant motif. So what is your thinking about, and I'm not necessarily saying that's an accurate motif, I think we've been able to adapt to that in many respects. But how do you see the practical application in the industry, in industries like manufacturing and fashion, et cetera? I'd be interested in hearing that.
Oh, absolutely. So I would say that when we think about the future of work and we think about areas of opportunity, of course, technology is a tremendously growing field. The skill sets that are also needed, that are critical, are creative skills. You're looking for people who are thinking outside the box, who are creating solutions, who are innovating, who have social and interpersonal skills as well. That's what employers are looking for, and those are the types of skill sets that when you read from the Center for Urban Future, when you read McKinsey reports about the future of work, that's exactly what they're focusing on. So the creative industries are critically important. Ways in which we're supporting, to your question, Yusuf, when we're thinking about manufacturing, or we're thinking about the fashion sector, we actually have a program that we've been working on for the past 6 years with the CFDA, the Council for Fashion Designers of America. And this has been called the Fashion Manufacturing Initiative. We know that manufacturing has been declining in the United States, particularly in New York, but New York is a fashion hub. It's a place in which we have the creatives, we have the designers, we have manufacturers that are supporting designers that are here, but we have the entire value chain and supply chain that's here in New York. So we know that it's critical to actually support the manufacturers. When you have early stage designers or you have small sample runs, they need manufacturers to be able to do quick turnarounds with them and essentially prototype and pilot. So for the past 6 years, we've been working with the CFDA on something called the Fashion Manufacturing Initiative. So this is to help local manufacturers, local factories here in New York get grants in order to upskill and in order to actually integrate new technologies into their factories as well. So that's one project that we've been working on. Now we're actually scaling that. So you'll see in the news in the next couple of weeks that this project is continuing and it's actually scaling. So we're going to be supporting the Fashion Manufacturing Initiative, but not only supporting manufacturers and local factories, similarly upskilling, learning about advanced manufacturing, but we're going to have a really robust workforce development component associated with it, integrating new types of technologies, learning how to integrate that with the work that they're doing, with the creative work that they're doing as well, learning about integrating digital skills, business skills internally in the work that they're doing, and also thinking creatively about new types of funds in which we can help support designers and local manufacturers as well to bring down cost points and to further incentivize innovation. So those are some of the ways in which we've been supporting manufacturers and advanced manufacturing, because it is a critical industry that we have here in New York. But I did want to address what
Absolutely.
was
Please.
talking about earlier, which is issues of privacy, issues of cybersecurity. This is something that, of course, is integral to New York. And I wanted to make a bit of a distinction because when we're talking about infrastructure in the city of New York, our organization doesn't work on that as much. We do deploy certain types of infrastructure in areas like the industrial business zones to make sure that there's broadband access there. Or we're behind the New York City ferry system that's recently been deployed over the course of the past 2 years. So there's some infrastructure projects that we do, but most of our projects, at least from the programmatic end, the areas of strategy that I lead, are focused on programmatic activities. So how do we support innovation and business development? How do we support startups? How do we support people like entrepreneurs and workforce who are working within those sectors? And so it's critical when we're thinking about smart cities and sustainable development, it's critical to think about the underlying currency, which is data. All of the technology is either transferring data, relying on data, producing data, analyzing data. And so one of the areas that we're focused on is a request for expression of interest that we recently put out. We got proposals for, and we're in the process of evaluating, which is we're building a New York City Center for Responsible AI. And that's going to do a number of things, but the two primary components that I wanted to talk about here are, one is that it's actually going to look at critically about AI applications as they're being developed. And to go into your question, Yusuf, about equity and inclusion, we want to ensure that data that's being used in applications that are being developed benefit New Yorkers, benefit everybody is essentially the good, but we have a focus on New Yorkers, benefit New Yorkers. The data that's being used is private, it's secure, it's representative of New Yorkers as well, and it benefits New Yorkers. And so one of the components of what we're working on is what we're calling an applied research lab. This is essentially a sandbox in which we're going to work on not only pilots and kind of abstract thinking, or when you think about research, you think oftentimes this is kind of more theoretical. Everything that we do is not only devising a strategy, but we execute and we implement. So what we're going to be working on this applied research lab is specifically working with the corporate sector as well as government and academia to pilot what are particular AI applications that we want to make sure that we're bringing in the ACLU so that there's, the civic organizations have a seat at the table, community organizations, lawyers, regulators, industry experts. If you're thinking about an insurance application, and who's going to get access to automotive insurance, and what their premium is going to be, what's the data that's being used, who's developing this application, and essentially looking at the entire process, asking questions about it, and coming up with what are some best practices, what are some considerations, how do you ensure that there's no bias here, how do you ensure that there's transparency of decisions, how do you make sure that there's accountability within your organization. So that's one aspect within this applied research lab. The other aspect is data collaboratives, ensuring that data that's being used, which is critical, again, is critical currency when we're thinking about innovation, when we're thinking about what startups need in order to build financial inclusion products, to build healthcare applications of AI, whose data is being used? How do we make sure that it's private? How do we make sure that it's secured? But simultaneously, how do we make sure that we're mitigating risk for those who are sharing their data, whether it's larger institutions? And how do we make sure that we're thinking about that the application of that data is actually being used as it was intended? So we're trying to lower the barriers for this currency to be shared, meaning data to be shared, but we're maximizing returns about that. So creating different types of technical structures, maybe it's utilizing blockchain in order to do this, but also thinking about internal governance structures that organizations can have to ensure that this data is being used responsibly.
Thank you. And the last question I'm going to have is for Matthew. Matthew, you really have brought in a very interesting intersection of ideas with respect to thinking about mindfulness and building the smart city of the future. Can you share just a little introduction to us, please? And you have the time to also respond to all the questions that were answered. And then we're going to open it up to the audience to also engage, because I think it's important for the questions that folks will have to be brought about. But I think this thing about mindfulness and about how mindfulness as both a philosophy and a tool for thinking about building smart cities of the future is really interesting. And I don't think I've quite heard that yet. So please share.
Okay, thank you. So a lot of the questions will be answered and solutions given in the keynote a little bit later to what we've discussed. So I don't want to do that. But one of the things I think we need to be mindful of is something called citizen of the future mindset, and that is, what are the values of the society that we're building smart cities for? What do they want? What are the citizens of the future asking us to do for them in order for them to have economic equity, to have social equity, environmental equity, educational equity, and so on? What is the future asking us to do today in order to build what they need to thrive? Smart cities are a crucible of so many different human paradigm changes. And one of the key things is the cultural, I think, enlightenment. But also we need to be absolutely mindful that culture is not lost but embraced. Diversity is not lost but embraced. And so how do we build and leverage technology and ecosystems to support diversity to continue on its evolutionary path? And that's why I think mindfulness is so important. I don't think, if someone from 500 years was sitting here, a citizen of the future, I think that triple bottom line economics is what they would talk about. And I don't think that greed or homelessness would be in their diction, or poor sanitation. And so mindfulness is about being mindful of what are we creating into the future and what is the future asking us. And I'm not the only one that uses this philosophy. Einstein used it. So does Ray Kurzweil, one of the greatest AI innovators of today. He's a little bit out there, but he's great, I love it. So mindfulness really is about how do we reset the conversation, reset the collaboration, reset our purpose and align to build these new triple and bottom line economies, because I believe that's what we really want. And a citizen of the future, whether it's in Namibia, or whether it's in Cambridge, UK, or whether it's in New York and being a great fashionista, they will want us to build triple bottom line economics. And so I think it's all about resetting the way we do innovate, understanding what societal systems we want to create for the future, and understanding how do we transition into those new systems of equilibrium, balance, and harmony. And the great teachers like Aristotle, Newton, Einstein, Da Vinci have all given us keys how to build that future. I'll stop there because I can go on forever.
I mean, this is like, I kind of had goosebumps because I'm thinking a lot about and I live in Syracuse, which is the heart of the Onondaga Nation. Onondaga Nation are a part of the Haudenosaunee, who people refer to commonly as the Iroquois Confederacy. And actually what they do is they say in every deliberation, we think about not our generation, not this generation, but the 7th generation yet to be born. And so what you're speaking of is very rooted also in indigenous principles and values, and there's something to learn from that. So thank you for sharing that, particularly when we're talking about the future. So I am going to be mindful of the fact that we have another 20 or so minutes that I want to give people in the audience an opportunity to ask questions and engage in a dialogue with the panelists. We really do want to make this a robust conversation. I can ask 50 million questions, and so if no one has any, then I will just keep asking of them. But I think there's an opportunity for you all to engage, and there have been at least 5 people, and I will point to you if you don't raise your hand, but there have been at least 5 people who have had questions, and so please introduce yourself briefly and ask whomever you would like to refer to in the panel.
Hi, Kathy Martins. I'm in the sustainable investment space. Matthew, love what you said. Couldn't agree more. The triple bottom line economy is where we need to go to. How do we, you mentioned, we have some, I guess you said keys to how to transition. How do we speak, I don't know, I'm going to say it in my own words, speak to the heart of the current generation to make them understand that maybe not so much by using rationally, because I think it's very hard, but making them feel like we're all interconnected and that's what we're going to do. Right now, I mean, there's already a generation who thinks that way, right? So there's like a loss of communication. And so I recently heard an astronaut speak, and it was incredibly inspiring because he said when he was out there in space and looking down to planet Earth, there is no separation. It is one planet, and we're all together in this. And so you don't have this. We're inventing it ourselves, right? So how do we transcend this? I'd love to hear some of your keys.
Well, I don't want to honk because the other panel will speak as well, but I would love to talk to you privately about this. The keynote will give you some clues into this. I think we have to be careful of our language. Mindfulness is still pretty brave being out in that world. I would like to go much further, to be honest, like enlightenment and things like that. And one of the biggest Fortune 10 companies in the world, I remember having a conversation with one of their leaders about 18 months ago, and they were talking about how do we build an enlightened society, and this is a tech company. Right? So can we take this offline, because I recognise the other panellists need to have some vocal law, because I'm speaking later, so you guys need to speak.
Jalal?
Yep. Sorry, a bit of a tangent to the conversation we are having, but to your point about data ecosystems, I think that's one of the key critical challenges in moving towards a sustainable city. So I was working on a project with Ford on autonomous mobility, and one of their challenges was like everyone has gold mines of data, Uber, Lyft, Bird scooters. When you go to Santa Monica, you have like 100 different last mile solutions. But they speak in different languages. So there's no common platform to leverage that gold mine of data as of now. So it's interesting that you guys are already thinking about that.
Let me ask you a question, if you don't mind me doing this.
Sure.
Who here thinks they should own their own data? Should you own your own data? How many people? Hands up.
I'm also one of those, I'm sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, Karen.
No, I'll let you speak.
I think, similar to address part of your question there and building off of what you had mentioned, Jalal, as well, I think that a critical component is building, sure, is this any better? I think a critical component is actually building awareness and education. And so when it comes to thinking about this kind of standard platform that institutions can have so that their data can be combined or can actually speak to each other, I think that it's critically important for whichever generation it is to understand the value of their data and not to just easily give away their data, just understand the importance of it, the danger of it, and part of that is just digital literacy in general. And so that's an aspect that we're also working on, is not only thinking about how do we help support data for new types of innovation, but also how do we empower the consumer and the everyday person to understand the importance of their data so they are able to see the interconnection, and they're also able to see areas in which their data is either being abused or there's such tremendous value in it that oftentimes just thinking about data and its training aspects for AI applications, if an AI application is not trained on certain people's data, it could be even dangerous. So like an example that I use is AI applications that are used to help diagnose diabetes. There was an article in the New York Times several months ago that was actually saying that it wasn't trained on diverse data sets. And a big portion of the population that has diabetes are actually people of color, so African American as well as Latino community. And if it's not trained on this data set, not only will it be inaccurate, it could actually be dangerous, So just understanding the importance of representation, or oftentimes you don't want that representation of your data, that awareness and education I think is a critical aspect. Seeing how you're all connected.
And actually, the real way to do this is to change the direction of innovation. So new products and solutions force the Fortune 500 companies into a transitional change. So the old paradigms of what Google, Facebook, and others are doing now will naturally go away, particularly with some of the new innovations that are happening, which will force them into data ownership conversations and reset their entire business model. That's the way to actually influence the global conversation. I may get into trouble for that, but there we go.
Before you go, I know this whole healthcare discussion, data ownership, we had a discussion earlier during the break, and I really want to elevate what you said, and so please, if you could introduce yourself and ask your question.
I just based on the whole day's discussion around the issue of both the climate change and AI and 4IR, the discussion that I haven't had coming out quite clearly is the issue of equity and social justice. It comes out again and again, but the reality is we are sitting with 60% of people who are unemployed, who don't have access to the basic infrastructure. And to me, if it's a global conversation, we should be talking about how do we get that into those communities so that they can have access. But secondly is the costs that have come out with both in the technology and climate change, which are, the costs are just not affordable for the basic person in Africa yet. It's the ones that we need in terms of the solutions, right? So I'm including the discussion now on smart cities. We want that, what do we envisage the future? The future should be, everyone should be part of it. But 60% of those people are sitting in rural areas where they have no access. So I would like to have that conversation on the access, the resources, how are they getting deployed to ensure that nobody is left behind in this conversation.
Yeah, so in the keynotes, I'll talk about where should AI sit and serve in a developing economy. It's one line, but I was involved in M-Pesa in Kenya in the early stages, and I think the mobile phone is probably going to play a predominant role for delivering AI kind of services and other innovations that will come through.
So that feels
Very
like
important.
Yusuf set me up here. First I should note I'm an advisor to humanity.co, which is promoting either the 31st personal human right for personal data ownership, has a privacy development toolkit that they're developing. That is already planned for deployment into, according to the Human Development Index, the 181st poorest nation on Earth, post-conflict, post-Ebola Liberia. We have a plan and a framework agreed by the government of Liberia, Syracuse University, and another startup, and so I have another conflict of interest I'll disclose, IMCON International, that has a internet backpack. And now I'm going to do the shout out to the organization that got the internet to half the planet already, the Internet Society. Jolie McPhee, thanks so much, Jolie, for everything you've been doing. They've been working on building community networks across the developing countries. So where there is access in many regions, it's directly because there's active communities there. I'll do one more shout out for Internet Society. There's an event they have called Radical Networks. That's in Manhattan in October 18th to 20th. That would carry a lot of this conversation forward further. Now back to Liberia. We have a framework that would, in 5 years, take a country from 7% internet to 40%. That would bring an unlicensed nationwide internet frequency backbone network, just like the advanced countries started. It was all education networks first. That's not how it started elsewhere. It started with commercial, unaffordable networks. So we have government permission to connect to the cable landing station, to build out along rights of way to all cities and towns, and connect them with these internet backpacks, 6,000 of these internet backpacks for all schools, for all hospitals, for all health clinics. And rather than just say, it's such a poor nation, you can't be done, well, guess what? There's blockchain, there's cryptocurrencies. The data of the people of Liberia is worth something on the world market. They don't have to sell it, but they could. So we have mechanisms in place to put some amount of dollars into people's pockets. So of course, it's done with a public-private philanthropic partnership to jumpstart this thing. So we're hoping for a $100 million grant, or if anybody has a spare $100 million in their pocket, hi, Henry. Your fund does. But this is with it's not just charity, because this backbone network that we're putting in cuts across 11 different, we're getting an asset because we're doing this for the children of Liberia, for the health of the country, that no private company could ever build that network, ever. The access rights of way alone, so this is a build, transfer, operate model. Syracuse University is going to help put it in, or help design it. And you might know, in upstate New York, we're not going to stick around and run this thing indefinitely. So it's going to be turned over, it's going to be commercialized, it's going to be an ongoing commercial operation, and I can already see, oh, how much is that rights of way worth, Henry? It's way more than 100 million. So this is a replicable model that we're looking towards to using in cooperation with the Nobel Peace Prize winning Ellen Johnson Sirleaf as a model for both women's empowerment, for children's education, and as an example to the world to get to address the issues you're talking about. We've been in discussion with about 10 African countries as well. We have not yet deployed some of this technology is already about 10 countries in trial stages. So there's absolutely a way to combine blockchain, cryptocurrency, advanced networking, working with the Internet Society, which you should all join. It's really cheap, and work towards a more equitable, just approach. Thank you.
I'd like to address that as well. Of course, I come from the lens of New York City, and so I want to ground it here because I think it's imperative to think about, sure, there's a lot of wealth in New York, but there's a tremendous amount of disparity in New York itself between those that have and those that don't. So I want to kind of ground it in two perspectives in regards to that, or two aspects. One is just basic infrastructure, right? Thinking about access to the internet. There are actually a lot of people in New York who don't have access to the internet. They sit outside of public libraries in order to get access to the internet. That's fundamental. Secondly, education, right? There's a public school education here in New York, and it varies from community to community based on the way that it's funded. So those are just two, just kind of off the bat, thinking about the first bucket of just basic infrastructure when we're thinking about social justice, equity, and access. And those are all things that the private sector and the public sector are coming together to try to address. So one of the things that New York City is doing is in the next couple of weeks, you'll see that there's actually a citywide effort for broadband to ensure that there's competition for broadband access and that there's equity in terms of everybody has access to affordable broadband. So that's something that's very fundamental. The second part when it comes to education is thinking about there are programs in New York where in public schools, in every public school, they have computer science for all. So all public school students have access to that. There are programs that are collaborations between the public and private sector called AI for All also. So that at a very young age, kids are exposed to artificial intelligence and also the importance of their data. So those are just kind of two examples in which either government is working on or government and the private sector are working on some of these fundamental infrastructure issues, which I think are imperative and they need to be scaled. The second part that I wanted to focus on, which is what my organization does, is try to help support entrepreneurs and the workforce too. So when we're thinking about entrepreneurs, we have a very critical eye, and our mandate is about inclusion, equity, access. So I think about our blockchain strategy. We launched our blockchain strategy last year, and the fundamental reason why we launched it is because if this technology is going to be as transformative as people say that it's going to be, if it's going to be like what the internet is, we want to make sure that New York sits at the table, that all of our people, 40% of our population are first-generation immigrants. We're so proud of the diversity that we have in New York. We want to make sure that we are sitting at the table and we're thinking about what are the rules of the protocol? You know, what are the products that are going to be created? How is this going to be used? And if you're an entrepreneur, you have exposure to what this is. It's not some sort of a black box. You have an understanding as to how this is going to be used. So we go around, we have a blockchain center in the Flatiron. It's a community center open to all to come. We do public education, lunch and learns. Adults come and sit and learn a little bit about what this is. We have kids who come. Last Friday, we had an organization called Black Girls Code come to have their first exposure to what blockchain is as well. So what we're thinking about are what are access points so that we could support public education around these technologies, and we can support entrepreneurs who might not have deep pockets to afford, the most expensive lawyers and try to get into kind of the back pockets of regulators. We want to make sure that they have access to fundamental legal services, thinking about new types of business models, how these products could be used. So they're the ones who are actually creating the products as the entrepreneurs and as the business owners as well. So those are some of the ways in which we're trying to address equity and social justice in New York.
There were a number, first of all, just off of this panel, I'm going to go to you, then I'm going to go to you afterwards. There were a number of SDGs that were hit in this conversation. And so what I appreciate is just that we oftentimes don't think about how each of these synergies can actually begin to check off a number of the SDGs that have to be addressed and mitigated. Please.
Great, thank you. Henry here. So I think the concept of smart cities have been sort of discussed and tossed around the last few years. So I think some cities around the world, it's being implemented as smart cities. If you look at the cities that we live in New York, or in New York City in general, only a few years ago, New York City subway was not wired. We're getting some internet connectivity, thank you very much, only sections of it. With that said, is there any definitional type what is considered a smart cities?
There is no definition.
There is.
Is
New York City considered a smart city, and not what is considered, what's the parameter?
The National Institute of Standards and Technology is writing a smart city framework that will include the definition.
Yeah.
Okay, Rand already has.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to take liberty as the moderator to go 1, 2, 3. Okay?
I'm happy with that.
So there will be a official National Institute of Standards and Technology definition of a smart city in a smart city framework probably by next year. That would be in something called a smart city framework. Now, that is not yet released, that is true, so I'll defer to the next speaker.
Right. With all due respect, I think it's absolutely wrong to say that there's no definition. In fact, the problem is there are multiple definitions of what a smart city is. And there's a RAND report published in 2014 on RAND Europe report, which tries to actually combine all of those definitions and come up with a comprehensive one. Yeah, it's an open source report, and I'm sure they did come up with one cohesive statement on what is a smart city. But at the very crux of it, infrastructure and communications technology setup is what forms the backbone.
So there's different tiers of cities with different cultural backgrounds, different built environments, different communities, and different ICT infrastructure, different budgets, different mindsets. There is no definition of smart cities. Standards are useful to help the majority of developed cities to move into new paradigms, to kind of create a baseline model for metrics, okay? That's great. I don't care about that. What I care about are communities that are empowered and supported to invent their future. That is the most important thing. So for cities, smart cities, it's about communities coming together to leverage, and stakeholders to leverage technology to build their future and to create the fabric that they want for their vision. Now we have to move from smart city into smart region, because air quality does not obey jurisdictional boundaries, nor does traffic congestion. And so one of the problems we have are politicians that don't want to work across jurisdictional boundaries. Now that kind of thinking stifles innovation and actually keeps people in social inequity. So thinking smart region is really, really important, because having platforms that can serve the regional communities is what the pathway out of some of these big problems that we're going to have. So yes, there are IEEE, and Lee, I admire you tremendously, you know that, and thank you for quoting, I appreciate that. There is no definition.
A little controversy is not problematic. This is a very good discussion. Please, Ms. Gupta.
I just have two comments and kind of a question. One is smart cities is really about bringing equality to and benefit to a larger population. So if you're looking at waste management, for instance, cutting down the cost for the city for collecting garbage from areas that have too much garbage and they're not getting enough service, and not sending out trucks and incurring costs to areas where you don't have enough garbage. So it's really about efficiency, and the way to look at it is it's really equalizer, it's really democratizing, and it's not really, the way I see it, in the right hands. It's built and intended to bring benefit to all. By the way, I'm a cybersecurity strategist, so I'm not really even talking about the cybersecurity aspect of it, because what, as Lee said, integrating and doing security and privacy by design as we increase the connectivity in these cities is critical. So it's not something that's, it's like water in the ocean. It's not something you can have a two-liner and say, this is what you need for cybersecurity for a smart city. You really can't. It's like Lee said, it has to be baked in by design. But that brings me to the question I have for the panel, which is what we really need is transparency. As we're talking about AI and not having bias, and you're talking about underrepresented class or misrepresentation, that's what we really need to know as citizens. What is the transparency? How are you building these systems, and in language that is understandable? So it's not enough to say that we have education and awareness. We all know that. I mean, I'm the biggest proponent of security awareness and training. Without that, there isn't going to be enough, questions being asked. And so I think the biggest challenge right now is the transparency for these AI models, and that's something I like. Karen, I think Karen, right? Yeah. Karen, what would be? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any insight on how you would build that into the platform, that would be very helpful.
That's exactly what we're doing with this New York City Center for Responsible AI. As I mentioned, this Applied Research Lab is exactly doing that. It's trying to build transparency into this entire system by design, as you had said earlier. So these pilots that are going to go through this are going to be sourced from the community. And like I said, the community is going to have a seat at the table to essentially say, this is what we want to know. This is how we want to know whether it's a city application, a state application, or a corporate application, an AI application that's being developed. We want to make sure that they are sitting there to ask questions. They are sitting there to say, I don't understand how that works. Why are you considering this particular factor as part of your algorithm as well? So having that dialogue and having that, essentially everybody being informed on what the process is What are the accountability steps here as well? How are you going to audit that? All of that is going to be baked into what this is going to be. There needs to be some sort of a platform in which the public's a part of it. You have the technologists that are sitting at the table. You have regulators and policy people who are sitting at the table to ensure that rights are actually being upheld too. So it's essentially a mechanism, a design mechanism by which everybody has a say and that transparency is being built in.
Unfortunately, that was the very last question that we can take for today. I tried to get as many as I can. I want to thank the panelists for the really good conversation. A little controversy, I like that.